Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. Hello, and welcome to How2Exit.com, the How to Exit podcast, talking about mergers and acquisitions. Today, I'm here with Ace Chapman, and I'm really excited about this show today. I've been watching his YouTube channel and consuming content this guy's been putting out for a long time. Ace Chapman has been acquiring businesses for over 20 years. His first business he bought was online stock market simulator in the early days of the internet. He purchased the website, made some changes, and grew it from 10,000 subscribers to over 250,000 before selling it. Since that initial acquisition, he has built systems around uh, building private equity funds, completing close to 200 deals. Ace has spent years developing his team, investors, and extensive network. In addition, he has developed proprietary due diligence process on acquisitions as well as a deal funnel process. He has taken time building relationships throughout the world with people and who will one day be interested in selling their companies. And his process is one of the reasons the majority of his partners return fund after fund. Man, I'm really excited to have you on the show. Thank you for being here, and just welcome, man. Welcome for being here.
Yeah, it's really good to be here. I feel like I'm in good company. We both have a lot of the same friends in the space, and have I've worked with some of the other folks that you've interviewed, and so yeah, really cool. I love like we were talking about just a minute ago. I love talking about this stuff. It's been 20 years. I'm still not tired of it. So always enjoy a chance to dig into some of the new things that we're up to.
Well, let's just start right with your origin story, man. How did you get into this space? Like, what convinced you to buy that first company? And luckily, it went well because you did it after 200 more times. So let's start right there.
Well, the real news is it didn't go as expected for sure. And the end of the story sounds pretty good by saying that we sold it, but we sold it at about 1/10 of what it was worth at its height. So I'll talk about what happened there. I was in college. I was a sophomore when I came across this stock market simulator game, and I just loved the market. I love Wall Street. So there wasn't a lot of these out there, and so you could play the market, you could win these prizes depending on how you did. And so I was like, man, this is a really cool concept. The downside was the site was always crashing. There were always, just customer service issues. We had a forum. Everybody would talk about how they would have issues, and they would reach out and just literally never hear back from anybody. And so summer was coming, and I reached out to them to basically see if they wanted an intern for the summer. And this was in the early days, so just the idea of going in and being able to work for this little internet company, like that was exciting. So I was like, man, saved up money last summer. I'll just go and work for these folks for free. And they responded and they said, hey, we've moved on to a whole nother business. We want to sell this business. If you have somebody who wants to buy the business, you can get them to buy it and then you can intern for them. I'm like, that sounds like a terrible offer. Like, what? Like, me go find you a buyer so that I can get a free job? Like, that doesn't sound like a good deal. But I was really interested in the business. Just like, okay, this internet thing, it's new. Like, how's this business operating? So this was 1999, and there also just weren't brokers. I have my good merger shirt on, and so we have a brokerage now where we broker a lot of internet business, do a lot of stuff with Empire Flippers. There's FEI. There's all these different brokers. That just wasn't a thing. And even for the offline brokers, they're just like, no, like this isn't even a real business. What are you talking about? 20 years ago, they'd laugh at somebody trying to sell a, website as a business. So they ended up, sending me all the information. I told them, yeah, like maybe I'll come across somebody who wants to buy it. And they didn't have anybody else that was willing to help them sell it. So they sent all their information to this 19-year-old college kid with fingers crossed, I guess. And I got the information. I saw that they were making about $70,000 a year. And I realized that, 70,000, like, I had friends that were coming out of college that were making a lot less than that. And I asked them how much they wanted for the business. And they said, we'd love to get 60,000. So I'm like, wait a minute, so I would get all the money back in a year. And so the other thing was, I had a lot of friends, and I went to Colgate University. It was costs at that point $40,000 a year. Now it's even more expensive, which is outrageous. But people were coming out after spending that much money and making 40, 50,000. And so that was my comparable. But even having a comparable and thinking this is a good deal, not understanding anything about multiples or anything like that, there wasn't even online resources to figure that stuff out back then. But it didn't really matter because I had $3,000 in the bank. And so what ended up happening was my first, again, unbeknownst to myself, my first LBO, where I got them to finance half of it. Basically, again, just going back to them like, hey, if I came up with half the money, could I pay the rest of it over a longer period of time? They said, yeah. And then I had a buddy who liked the business as well and wanted to invest, and then put some credit card money together for the rest of it, which put me about $15,000 worth of credit card debt. But the first part of the story was amazing. Yeah, they hadn't been paying attention to the business. It was a lot of low hanging fruit. They did have another opportunity that they were really excited about, but I just got to work doing the simple things and grew the business. Quit college, end up getting that experience of hiring employees, raising capital, and so everything was killer for us old heads. We'll remember 2001, 2002 was the dot-com bubble bust. And most of our sponsors, we basically operated off of sponsorships. Most of our sponsors slowly just started going out of business, going bankrupt. It was like we were kind of at the end because we had low costs. But into 2001, 2002, we made it for a while, until like they were just all going away. And then, but we did have this big database of young people, and this is something that's interesting just when you're thinking about what business you go into. If you can have a database of people that are just valuable, that and you're in a space where people are willing to pay a lot of money to acquire, looking at what's the cost what's the acquisition cost of these people. That's where we were. So we did a deal with what's now TD Ameritrade. They made some acquisitions over the years, and mergers, but we sold that database to them, and I was depressed. Had this business. My view of entrepreneurship and being successful at that point was you start a business, or you're in a business, and you're going to run it forever. It was Microsoft. It was Apple. Mark Zuckerberg wasn't even a thing then. So it's just more of these old school folks where it's like, the way you do this or the way you get successful is you have that one business that you're going to run for, your life, and it turns into this big thing. And so I ended up, selling it for a kind of dirt cheap price. Ended up going and working at SunTrust and mortgages for a while, and it just clicked one day. It's like, I wonder if I could just buy a mortgage company, because I didn't see myself as a business buyer. I didn't see that as a thing. And so, sure enough, there was a mortgage company in my city that was for sale. And that was when it didn't click until that second deal that I realized, oh, I could just go out and buy these businesses. It doesn't have to be that I have to have this one thing. I could buy them, I could sell them. I should have sold that one when it was worth 10 times. I should have sold it early. And so I was able to look back and learn a lot of those lessons that I just didn't have the perspective to be able to learn while I was in the middle of it.
So just I guess it was this week we actually interviewed Adam. Hasn't even came out on the podcast side of it. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, it'll be right before this show. But Adam Coffey actually wrote the book Private Equity Playbook, and he's really talked about it. But our show is really about like how to sell to private equity, what they're looking for. It sounds like you're an expert on creating a fund, right? You talk about that in some of your videos and stuff. Let's kind of talk about that space and like what does it look like to start an equity fund or private equity fund?
Yeah, so that did come years later.
Yeah.
So I it took a while for me to understand the value of creating a fund. I was buying and selling businesses, and bought the mortgage company, ended up doing a home investor franchise. I shout out, it doesn't have the name, but someone just popped in and said, I love Ace. He was once known as the go-to guy for tanning salons. So in the 10-year period before I got into funds, like did a roll up of six tanning salons, which that was just as a funny story. The first time I ever walked into a tennis salon. And if you're watching the video, you'll understand why. First time I ever walked into a tennis salon, I walked out the owner because it was just this amazing deal. I learned a lot about the industry. And so I saw this unique opportunity. And so did that. So over the course of 10 years, I'm doing all these deals. And then I meet someone who ends up becoming a mentor, my most important mentor, guy Mike Aiken, who flipped hospitals. And he was one of the people that started to just really change my vision of like how this whole world worked. Even going back to my very first deal, one of the things that he made me realize, like, yeah, like my first deal failed. We didn't really exit at a good price and that kind of thing. It's like, okay, like what were the numbers and how much you buy it for? It's like bought it for like 60,000. It's like, okay, and like how much did you make over the 3 years that you ran it? And it's like, oh, about close to 300. It's like, what are you talking about? That's a success. And so, again, just seeing things differently, whereas, I think most people look at business from the perspective of a business owner. What I've grown into through the funds and through mentors like Mike was to really see it almost like a trader. You know what I mean? To really see it from that I quadrant of being an investor, and no investor is upset that they turned $60,000 into $300,000. So that was the beginning of that. But still, he's telling me you need to get this into a private equity fund format. And I was like, what are you talking about? Then I had another friend and mentor, Noah, who was telling me kind of the same thing. I'm like, y'all are crazy because like right now I'm doing these deals and I get to keep all the money. And you're telling me to do these deals and give some of the other people some of the money. I'm like, I'm not a mathematician, but I can get all the money or I can get some of the money. I think I'm going to stick with all the money.
Now, at that point, were you doing LBOs? Like you're doing loans and debt and to structure it?
Yep, yep.
Okay,
So
cool.
at that point, I was, I was doing all of the funding myself. I might raise a little bit of equity capital, but I was funding through, in a lot of cases, debt. And again, it works. It worked really, really well. It still works really, really well. And so I just didn't see from my perspective, okay, what is this fun thing? Like, why would I do that? But fortunately, I had some folks who basically said, "Hey, we're just going to go along this path. Let's just try it. Let's do a small $1 million fund and see, just how it goes." I'm like, "All right, we can try it out." And it's one of those things that until I did it, I didn't really see the benefits. But it just became really obvious. The first thing was, wow, like I've done all these deals, and now for the first time, I'm building a track record. If I'm going to do something, why not build an audit? I'm working as we're putting it together. I'm working with the auditor. I'm like, so yeah, so after this process, like I'll have this audited track record. And so now, like, instead of me just doing these one-off things, I got to go to the bank, got to convince them, I got to go to these other folks, get some investment money. Like now, I've got this audited track record. The other thing that was really kind of interesting to me was the tax benefits. So here I was just out there hustling and making money and getting taxed like crazy. And meanwhile, I could basically be a GP. And, I won't try to give tax advice here, but suffice to say, I was paying a lot less taxes on the deals that I was doing within the fund instead of the deals that I was just doing out there on my own. And so it just over time became clear that, okay, there are some benefits to me doing things within this fund structure. And I think, at the end of the day, when you look and you see who are the biggest people that are buying and selling businesses, um, they're doing it in a private equity fund structure. And there's a reason why.
So I was going to ask you if there was an epiphany moment, like where you're like, "Oh, I got to do this fun thing," but it sounds like they actually convinced you, like, "Hey, let's do one and see what you think," which is kind of interesting. A lot of people end up in business that way. It's kind of an accidental approach. Like, I hear a lot of people when I talk to them, like, "Why did you start the business, or how did you start it?" Like, "Well, I thought I could do it better than the boss, and I was really frustrated, so I went out on my own and tried." Or let me say, like I started doing this for a couple of friends. The next thing I know, I had 4 people, and then the next thing I had 10 customers, and I thought I better make a business out of it. So in that realm, it sounds like you kind of had a couple of friends that's like, you really got to go down this path, and we're going to help you go down this path. And now you can call those guys back and go, that was an absolute blessing because you figured it out. You've repetitively done it. It looks, you said you've done over 200 deals, so I imagine a majority of those are inside of this fund structure.
Yeah, so that was about 10 years ago. And since then, I've done 7 funds just on my own. And I basically realized, okay, I had a couple of things that happened. I ended up doing kind of even after that first fund, it went well. One of the really cool things was the realization that, okay, like it's not that difficult for me to generate these really amazing returns from the perspective of those investors. Even my worst deal, that first deal of turning the 70 into 300, of course, of 3 years, like that was a failure for me. So for us in this space, what we're used to generating, like they're just like, what in the world? So did the first couple of funds, then I did a $5 million fund, and that one got oversubscribed. And so for those listening, oversubscribed just means there are more people want to invest than the money that's available. So ended up raising it and saying, okay, I had friends contacted me and just saying like, hey, like, I've got this guy, he's a friend, like I really want you to get him in. So we pushed it to 7, and then pushed it to 9, and then pushed it to literally 12 before shutting everything off and just said, no, like I could not take any more. And that was one of the greatest lessons because I got to see the difference between doing a $2-3 million fund and the power of those smaller funds in the micro space. What happens is with some of the larger deals that you're doing right now, larger private equity funds are coming down. And so they're very happy with a 10% return. And if you're in search for ROI, then you don't want to compete with people who are willing to take, 1/5 the ROI that you're looking for. Last fund that we ended last year did a 300% return. We can't do that if we're competing for deals with people that are happy to do a 12%. They're static about a 12% return. So it's important that we stayed really, really small. And so we had these two choices. Once I got the 12 million, it's like, all right, I can go out, I can do a lot more smaller deals, which that just gets tough to manage and to acquire. You know what I mean? So to really keep a high standard and get those deals done. And or I can do larger deals, and then I'm competing with people that don't want to get the kinds of returns that I want to get. And with the structure of how I was earning as a GP, if I didn't make those really high returns, it just wasn't as attractive. You seem like you're about to ask a question on that.
Well, we had a user out there that asked, it said, it said, wow, very enlightening, but creating a fund sounds very intimidating.
Mm,
And I get that. I kind of, and at the surface level, I see the ads now because I'm in the space and people are always advertising, create your own fund. And it's
yeah.
always seemed like that's a big project we'll learn later. So could you break down some of that intimidating? Okay, can you go us through a couple of like I wouldn't say the detailed steps, but the high
Yeah,
level. Yeah, what does it look like to create something like that, and maybe dispel the myth that it's like really intimidating.
yeah. I think what one of the first steps to that is breaking down what the person really thinks is intimidating. Because most things, I think part of even buying a business, it was interesting because, like I said, going back 20 years, it's the same response that I got when I first started talking to people about buying businesses. I would tell people like, "Oh, I'm buying business." I would literally have people say, "Oh, you can't do that." And
Like,
I'm like,
I
"What are
love
you
when people say that.
talking
Like,
about?"
my natural response is, "No, you can't do that. I do it all the time."
Exactly, exactly. And so, as you break down those benefits of like, no, like this, the same way that you go out and you buy a car and you don't try to build the car from scratch, the same way that you go out and you buy this house, you don't try to buy the house from scratch, and you go and you get the financing. And what you realize that the intimidation factor for a lot of folks when it comes to buying a business was they just didn't know anybody who had done it. There's some people that are intimidated by buying a house. The idea of buying a house is intimidating, but that's because they didn't grow up in a family where maybe the parents did buy a house. They don't even have an uncle who bought a house, where they're just in the conversation. And so just being around people where you're talking to people and they're talking about an appraisal. So you have an idea, okay, well, that's a part of the step in buying a house. And, if I'm going to get a loan, it's called a mortgage. And I'll go to the bank and I can get that and they'll loan me a part of it. I may have to put down 10%. You just have a frame of reference. And so for private equity, it's the same thing. It's just being a part of those conversations. And so it's not even that it's like you could tell that person that's intimidated by buying a business, like, no, like it's easy and, you just go and you get a loan and da da da. And it's like, okay, no, that's too much at once. What I found though is as you do surround yourself, like now, um, to kind of get to a little bit of the end of where we are, I created a incubator called the Private Equity Fund Incubator for that very reason, because I don't think it's even a good idea to try to learn this by going through some videos or trying to read a book or that kind of thing. You need to be a part of the conversations. You need to understand, because it's not just about setting it up. It's about managing it. It's about having the proper distributions. It's about managing your investors on the back end, managing the deals, exiting the deals the right way. There's a lot of specific strategies that really, unfortunately, I did have to learn on my own, like I was learning buying businesses 20 years ago. But as you get around that, it's the same thing as being around people who go from being intimidated about buying a house to owning, like you, a lot of real estate and a portfolio and that kind of thing. The more you're around, I saw somebody even mention RIA. I was part of the RIA back when I owned the Homebester franchises, and same thing. There's just so much value and
Yeah,
getting around other people that are doing what you want to do and doing it successfully. And so that's what we've built with the incubator. We just had our sixth fund that's been incubated. Very proud of our fund five, where we had four women who are the GPs of that fund. And so now we're about to start seven, but we take them through the process of, here's how funds work. Here are the case studies. Here's historically, in the first 90 days. And then we literally build a fund from scratch.
that's awesome. So you're in the space where you can help somebody else build a fund. You can actually build funds for acquisitions and mergers. What's the? I mean, you have a niche. It sounds like maybe I missed it, but what's the range of funds that you would recommend somebody like just wanting to do roll ups or acquisitions and mergers to create? Is there? 'Cause you sound like there was a sweet spot that was easier to operate in inside of there.
Yeah, it does depend. I mean, it's not as if those funds that are doing, 15, 20% returns aren't making money. It's more of a personal thing. So for
Hmm.
my preference, I really love a small, short-term funds. So we're doing like 2-year funds.
Oh,
You know,
cool.
you're doing something, and so it's not so much that it's like, oh, this is the right way to do it, or that kind of thing. It's what are your personal preferences? A nightmare for me would be managing a 10-year fund, but that's a personality thing. I want to be able to get in. We're doing literally 2-year funds, 3 million or less, in that fund, and we're trying to kill it. You know what I mean? We're trying to get literally triple. I had we're in PEFI 6 or something. We're doing some. We're closing on a deal, and they were calculating what the ROI should be with my fellow GPs that are in that incubator. And one of the guys like, yeah, like I've gone through these numbers like a bunch of times, but I just can't. It's not coming up right because this is their first deal they're closing. He's like, I'm like, well, what's going on? Like, what's up with the numbers? He's like, well, yeah, I've got this in here that looks right. I've got this in here that looks right. But when we get to the end, it's a 456% return. It's just shout out to Jeremy. He's the person that was going through this. Like, it's 456% return. Like, no, this can't be right. Like, I'm missing something. I'm like, no, like that's right. Like, that's what like, hopefully we get that, but we want to at least have that as the potential so that we can generate the kind of returns that PEFI 1 did.
So how do you get paid as the fund owner? I know you get a management fee of a point or two. I mean, that's a typical structure. And do I've seen some of the funds, and I'm listening to Adam's book on, and he covers a little bit how the funds operate. And he says that a lot of them, they get a management fee, and then the investors are guaranteed up to a certain rate before they get a success fee. So how do you structure? Do you do a management, like a 2% management fee and a success fee at the end, or
Yes,
as
that's
a
one of the important things, and that's why I like doing my funds the way that I do them. Is I don't charge a management fee.
okay?
So I do everything on performance. So that means that, if I can go in and we just absolutely kill it, then my upside is really huge. So the investors will typically get the first 8, 9. Now inflation's a little bit higher, so maybe 10% in some cases. So they get the first 10%. After that, we end up, in most cases, doing a 50-50 split with the LPs. So, if we're doing a 300% ROI, then that becomes, the basic numbers, 140 essentially to us, 150 to them. So that is kind of what motivates me to get excited about doing those funds. I think the other thing that, and this just goes to as I got into this, my realization even 10 years ago, I think that, eventually we basically all have to get really good at managing our money. At the end goal, we're going to end up as a fund manager. It just so happens that your only fund is your nest egg. And so, for most people, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're an employee, whatever, they're saving up their money, and then one day they want to stop working and they become a fund manager.
I get
And
it.
there's
That's an
one
interesting alignment there, right?
Yeah. There's one very bad thing about it. They've never managed a fund in their life. And now they've got to manage the most important fund of their life, which is their nest egg. And they know nothing about how to oversee and manage that. And even more scary is if they lost that nest egg, the only way that they knew to build that nest egg back up was to work for 40 years or have a business for 20 years or 30 years or whatever. And so now they're going back and they have to figure that out. And so one of the things, again, just kind of, it just, all these things started to click as I'm in it. But one of those things was, this is the most important skill set that you could have is, that power to manage and oversee it. But the other thing is, if you are going to spend time getting a skill set, why not understand how to raise the capital? And instead of having to spend 20 years to build that nest egg and then make an earning. At the end of the day, we all want to be able to live just off the returns of that fund. This is just skipping that. It's kind of the ultimate hack to the end. So you're skipping that process and getting to the end where it's like, all right, I could just raise a fund in 5 years and, hopefully it does go really well. But if I get really good at this, then I don't need to spend the 40 years to be able to then figure out how to manage my nest egg fund. I just get good at that now, and then I'm still making the returns off of that fund. But it just happens to be that the nest egg is someone else's money. It doesn't have to be my money.
I got that. So one of the questions that just popped up from a LinkedIn user, and it didn't say their name, it just says LinkedIn user. Let's see if I think I can click it on the screen so everybody can see it. Did it show up there? So they're asking if like all you're doing is micro deals. So what is this? Just because like your funds are $2 and $3 million or $5 million, that doesn't mean the deals are that size, right? Because you can negotiate buying the right.
Yeah,
You could buy $100 million company and they only need $1 million down, and you could fund it with the fund. I mean, technically, right? So,
exactly.
so,
Exactly.
so having what he's referring to as a micro fund doesn't mean you're doing micro deals, correct?
Exactly. And one of the reasons you can get really good returns is using as much leverage as possible. So it's a combination. So, I love the micro deals as well. It's one of those things where it really is. Some people ask, what are the types of industries that you guys are doing deals in? And it's been across. Like if you look at our recent deals, we're doing a second deal on the animation business right now. We've got a business that is a lender essentially and has a portfolio of loans, which you do a lot of that. So we're buying a business that has that portfolio of loans. So from animation studio to finance to we have a business in the, I guess you say, music training space. It just is so many e-commerce. Just across the board. We're doing a deal right now on that offline deal that's a franchise. So it's the cool thing is what we're going in, and even that measurement when I was mentioning Jeremy a second ago that he's doing, what we're looking for is literally ROI. And what you understand, I think one of the other keys, and there's so many of these things, even when I'm talking about being the nest egg manager or fund manager or whatever. But one of the other interesting things that we go through in the training is thinking about this like a private equity fund manager. You can't really, like, even that question is more like an M&A person or more like a business owner. And really private equity is just a totally different thing. So the best private equity fund managers in the world, most of them have never owned a business in their life. And it helps them. It's almost a detriment. If you've owned a business, you're going to think like a business owner and you're just not going to be a good fund manager. I saw a lot of, even with, we have people that have owned businesses before, I'm literally having to train them out of thinking about things like a business owner, kind of, and it's just so many levels to it. But the best people in the space, they're coming from finance, they're coming from investment banking, they're coming from a different thing. They're not coming from actually buying businesses themselves in most cases, or even owning a business themselves in most cases. So, and then some of the people who have done that have been some of the biggest failures in the space because it's a much different way of thinking. I think one of the things that a lot of people, because they've done an of amazing job of managing kind of the PR around private equity, most people will forget that private equity comes from corporate raiders. So corporate raiding and raiders got such a bad name in the 80s that they had to come up with a way to switch it. You
Ah,
know, the Dan Bilzerian's dad, a lot of these people who are out there doing like crazy stuff, and it got better. It's not like they were doing a lot of the craziness they were doing back in the day. But private equity, the reason you don't hear about corporate raiders anymore is because it's called private equity.
I got it. So Let's look at the logistics a little bit, just because I know these. I've got Stin on here. He's a friend of mine through some of the mentoring I've done. He's done some of the same mentoring,
Okay.
and some of these other guys. Let's look at the logistics. Are we when we set up a private equity fund? Is that like a private placement memorandum, or is there a different set of legal documents you got
Yeah.
to do?
Great question. So, what is a fund? A fund is a couple of agreements. One is the general partnership. So, general partners, those are all of the managers. When we are doing our incubator, each time we bring in four folks that partner with me, and we all act as the GPs. GPs are always going to put up some amount of money, and the more that the GPs are putting into the deal, the more that it gives confidence to the LPs. So you've got two things that are going to give them confidence. One is track record. The other is, are you, heavily invested? So in our GPs, usually I'm going to take control. So I put up more than half of the money. So I basically match whatever the other GPs in the incubator are putting up. So we basically serve as the GPs. The other part of the fund is the LPs. So you have these LPs. Each of those, it's limited partners. Each of those people are investors in the fund. So they're going to have their share of the fund based on how much they put in. They don't have to do any work, but it is really powerful. And this is one of the things that I again just learned over time. It's really powerful if you can get LPs who, number one, are really interested in the fund and have connections, expertise, or whatever. It's kind of bad, but they want it to be successful, and that becomes a little bit of free labor. Like I've had just some outrageously bright LPs. And I think one of the unique things about our space is it's just so much. But one of the things that's really unique is for a lot of these people, they want to be able to tinker with smaller businesses, but they don't have any motivation or reason to do it. But it's really fun for them. And so I've had people that have net worth of $100 million have absolutely no reason to be, in the weeds on our watch e-commerce, few $1 million business, but it's fun for them. And when you can give somebody that outlet for them to be able to go back, 30 years to when they were just getting started, that's a whole nother ROI that just can't be measured, and one of the biggest, kind of benefits. But the other thing is there's nowhere else to get access to that type of investment. So when you're looking at those LPs, you're trying to figure out who are the LPs that are going to get excited about this. And so one could just be excitement because it's fun. The other side could be where else are you going to go to get, in a time that we're living in right now where inflation is absolute nuts, and everybody's trying to get as diversified a portfolio as possible and get some exposure to as many different asset classes as possible. One of the asset classes that is near impossible to get access to is the small business arena. And so by trying, everybody wants, it's so funny because everybody wants to get the bigger and bigger and bigger deal. And it's like, no, the opportunity is giving those people who are investing in the bigger deals access to this smaller micro market. And you got the Russell 5000, which is a joke, and there's just nowhere else to get access to this. And so, what one of the reasons that I end up creating the incubator is that there's a plethora of LPs that are out there and want to put money in this space. What's missing is the talent to go out there and put the money to work. So you've got the LPs. Under the LPs, we're going out and we're acquiring these businesses. We put those into LLCs, and that's what the actual assets will sit in. So it's a very, when you break down the actual structure, it's a very simple structure. It's easy to do. Those agreements are easy. The tougher part is the actual strategies around managing the fund and generating really great returns.
Now, these GPs and LPs, are they all accredited investors?
Yeah, so I only deal with the GPs are really the hustlers, so they don't have to be accredited. They're doing the work. LPs, I really only deal with accredited investors.
The reason I ask is, coming from the real estate investment space, I can tell you I'm absolutely positive there's good investors and bad investors. I had a couple of ladies that I met at a event where they were learning. It's funny is I used to raise money going to events where people are learning to be private lenders. So I'd go to the private lending event and like, and because I wanted to learn some of that too, but it was mostly because I meet everybody in the room trying to learn that and go, by the way, I've got
Yeah.
6 houses lined up to buy, are you interested in funding them? And I've walked out of the room on some of those meetings with $100,000, $200,000 in investing. I did that out of Texas once, and I got 200K from a couple Asian ladies, they were good people until I had their money, and it was a horror story. I mean, it was just absolutely not because of anything other than they just were new at this.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The day we closed, they wired the money. I closed and bought 2 houses with the money, like $187,000 they loaned. I bought 2 houses here in Tulsa with it. The day we closed, after they wired the money, we closed. I get this phone call going, "Hey, I'm at the airport." I was like, "Okay, where are you flying?" "No, I mean, I'm at the Tulsa airport. I flew into town. I want to go see my houses." I was like, "First of all, you're the lender. They're not your houses. You're the bank. And second of all, what are you doing in town?" "Well, my partner wants me to come up and check out the houses we bought." And it's like that was the mentality, right? And the next thing I
Yeah.
know, she was like, "Hey, my son's coming up there for the summer, and he's an intern with you." I was like, "No, he's not." Like, didn't even ask, right? But this was the mentality, right? It's just like this constant. They would call me and try to. It's like, "Hey, we need to, go to those houses and send me photos of your progress." And I was like, you're not a hard money lender loaning me money to fix these houses up. You basically are the bank. So it was one of those. There are bad investors out there. And technically
100%.
I could have. She offered to loan me more money when we closed those deals, and they had 5 million in cash sitting there. I was like, no, I'm not interested. It was just such. It was a. I'd never had an investor where I borrowed money to buy some houses and I was on the phone with them 3 hours a week, just managing them, right?
Yeah. And
So I
that
like
ROI is horrible.
I say I know for a fact there's a such thing as a bad investor. So as you're going through your general partners and your limited partners, is there like an interview process you go through to like, is this going to be a good fit for me and to work with these guys, or what's your process for selecting people like and trust, benefit the fund and benefit you as a human being, and don't what I refer to as they're time vampires. They basically they don't suck the life out of you with like needing your time.
Yeah. So part of that does come from it. I'm glad that I got into the space the way that I did, because it was basically with feet dragging. And so, it was just known and very clear that, hey, I don't even really want to do this. I'm doing this as a favor. Yeah, the other part of that was really saying no to more people than I let in. And it's really interesting if you watch like the show Billions, where, if you're good at what you do and you know the strategies around it, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, like the people, the investors will have to spend more time convincing you to let them invest and why you should let them invest than they would than you even trying to filter them. So you're trying to figure out the best, and so that's what I was talking about. Even with LPs, like one of the things that I'm looking for in the LP is like they're selling me. I'm not really even selling them. So like, what are your connections? Can you get us deal flow? Can you get us good strategic partnerships? Are you willing to provide advisory services when we acquire a business? Like it's like your money isn't enough. You know what I mean? For most people that listen, when I tell people this, and even when people first come into the incubator, it's like, no, like for a lot of people, which is counterintuitive. They just printed endless trillions of the stuff. Like the commodity is not money. The commodity is not money. It's not a commodity. It's more of it than freaking rice. They're just printing it out. They can create it, quicker and easier than most things on earth. So the value is your ability to generate an ROI. So the money is endless. Like and then right now with inflation, you think about the person that's worth $100 million. They're desperate to get a return, because next year, if they don't have it working, just like those ladies, even though they're giving you a headache, they still want to get their money to work, because the next year that it's 8 million, if which is a low end of where inflation is. 8 million of that 100 million is in the wind. So yeah, you want to understand how to create that dynamic, because I would never want to run or create a fund where I'm actually trying to go and raise the money. Like it sounds weird, but like I literally have not. I think even just from the beginning, like I've never raised money. I think the last time where I will raise money, and this is interesting, but where we've raised money and did hustle is like if we're selling a deal. So we had a deal where we had invested and we took that business through WeFunder and did a crowdfunding raise. And so, but that was at the exit of that business, and we hustled raising capital. But I would never hustle or try to like really aggressively raise capital. It's more just like, hey, we got this. If you think you can add something to it, we'll consider allowing you to be an LP.
That's interesting. So on exit, you are raising funds. Were you raising funds to help the acquirer be able to pay you? Ah, so that's
Raise
so
money
that
off
that's
of
actually
people.
a kind of a fresh thing. Like, look, you're the right fit for this. You don't have the money. I'm going to reach out and actually, spend a little effort and help you raise the money to buy this because I'd love it to land in your lap. That's the first time I've heard anybody out of 25, 30 people I've interviewed and probably 100 people I've, set in Zoom calls with in this
It's a little
space.
secret. It's
Yeah, it's just
definitely
like
a
that.
little.
That's
It's a game changer for sure.
Like, I mean, because
So
you think about it, like, you could really run across somebody who's almost there with the funds or, like, has half the funds, but you absolutely know that if it's in their hands, it's in great hands. So I could see that. I could see where, like, it's smart to, like, "Look, I'll give you a hand here." So Stan asked one of the things he did ask is, what's the best tip for how to get started creating a fund? I would say reach out to Ace and have him help you start one, but what would you say is what
yeah,
would you
yeah.
say is the
You don't want to go through like our process is a very specific process, and we take you through the incubator. But if you're going to try to build one on your own, I do think that the stuff that I did before is what led me to being able to do the fund, and so I like doing those deals, raising capital for on a deal by deal basis is the way that you're able to start that fund. You don't want to start a fund from scratch and you've never built relationships with investors, you've never gotten returns to those investors. So while I just went a long time, so I had years where they're telling me like, hey, you should do this, you should do this, and I still was just like, no, like I'll let you put a little capital in on this deal. I don't need to do that fun thing. But I think that is where to start is get some deals under your belt and give a good return, and then once you're ready to raise your fund, you've got those contacts, you've got experience. I think even that's just a nightmare if you've never really done deals, and then it gets more and more complicated. Like the other thing that we're aggressively raising capital for is I just took a company public called Fiji. And so in that case, again, it's just like going through those steps is what allows you to do the future things. And so, I wouldn't try to rush. Like we do have a specific process with the incubator, but I'm glad that I went through each of these stages because taking Fiji public was just it's like everything else times 10, and so that was a lot of work.
So I get it. the This is a wide open space. I've met at least two people on the show. I just interviewed one yesterday. Times, yeah, it was yesterday. He's in acquisitions and mergers. He does turnarounds, but he in the last year they've created two funds, and both of them are around 100 million. Here in the United States, and one in Australia, I believe is what the second one is. I might be messing that up, but what you're talking about seems, it is taking them a long time to get those up and running, and a lot of work. It sounds like.
I don't have time, Ron. Life is too short to spend and it's again it's great. That's a great model. It's a long time to get those up and running. It's just everything is things that I don't want to do.
Yep.
You've got to negotiate with those, like with my investors, my LPs, like it's the non-negotiable. Like our terms are not with $100 million fund. you've got sophisticated investors, they're getting their attorneys. Those attorneys are calling your attorneys. They're debating. They want to change stuff in the LP agreement. They want these funds. It's just it's such a different world that if I'm going to deal with, again, and that's why I kind of mentioned the taking the company public. So if I'm going to deal with that, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds, but bottom line is, if I'm going to deal with that much headache, it's going to be in my own public company I'm a CEO of, not to do a fund, not
Right.
to do a fund. That's way too much headache. But to each his own.
I get it. Um, so we've been in this for we're right at the 50-minute mark. We're gonna have to start wrapping up the show. We covered a lot of topics and stuff. Is there anything like we really missed? Like, man, we probably should tell them this. One thing that comes to my mind is a lot of people think that when you create a fund, people have to wire your money and you got money sitting there. That's not true, right?
That's a
There,
great.
it's a pledge. Like it's a contractual pledge that's saying I pledge $1 million to your fund, and it doesn't get wired or transferred until there's an acquisition on the table. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so I'll give another little quick kind of expert level tip. Something that's interesting, and this is something that happened in one of the peppies, is you can pledge whatever. It doesn't mean that we're going to use all the money. And so, for instance, one of the GPs that was a part of the program really killed it because we have a minimum that everybody, basically all the GPs are going to put in 25,000, and he basically decided, hey, I want to put in 150 because I just like what we're doing. Well, it turns out that with leverage and everything, we only ended up calling about 50% of the money. Because we might refinance, take that cash back out, and then we've got more capital to go and reinvest. And so if you play the game right and you know a little bit about the strategy, there is kind of some chess to be played even with your commitment. So he only put up about 75, but he got to make ROI as if he had put up the whole 150. So some cool things there. But yeah, you're exactly right. So you're just making a commitment, and then as you find those deals, and just all these other things come into play that are so important when it comes to managing a fund, understanding ROI, because time is the most important part of that ROI equation. So we're looking at getting that money to work. It's how quickly we try to time it, like we're doing our first deal right now in Peppy 6. I have them completing the LP and GP agreements at the same time that we're completing our first LOI. We're getting
Yeah.
our first LOI done at the same time, so we can close both of those at the exact same time. The fund closes the same time we're closing our first deal.
So one of the things one of the LinkedIn users just asked is how do how do you refinance out of those short term funds? I'm thinking on exit. Maybe I don't understand. Do you understand the question there? I'll post it up there. So here's the question.
Yeah, so I think that they're not completely like you could refinance, but you're most of the time you're just going to sell the business.
Right.
So a refinance might be in before you're gonna sell. So it might be like we just did a deal where we wanted some financing to actually, so we bought a business, and this business in the art space, and then we had another business that we wanted to buy that was a great complementary business with a great database and that kind of thing. So we got basically a refinance to get cash into the parent business to be able to use that to buy the next business. And so this is one of the things, so again, some people may hear even those crazy returns and be like, oh, that's just nuts. Like, no way that's possible. But, when you take a deal like that, it's, when you're looking at the ROI, the income that comes from that subsidiary business of the business that we acquired, that's infinite return, because we
Well,
use
absolutely. Yeah.
$0 from the fund to buy that. So you might use a refinance and something like that, but then when you're exiting those businesses, you just sell them at the end of the fund.
Awesome. So we're at 53 minutes now. We probably need to make sure people know how to get in
I
touch
know.
with you, man.
We got into it's like the deeper the rabbit hole goes, the more. That's why I've been trying to be careful. Like if I go here, then I got to explain 10 more things. It's
Yeah. Well,
more.
we both love this topic. We both love helping people get involved in this topic. So, with that passion, I've had people that never been on a podcast before, and they're like, "I don't know if I could do an hour." I was like, "Trust me, man. If you're excited about this industry, I'm going to have to cut you off at about
Yeah,
55 minutes, right?" So we're at
exactly.
that stage. We're at about the 55-minute mark. I have your website up. It's simply for those of you guys who are just listening to the podcast. It's simply ACE Chapman, CACHAPMAN, just like it sounds.com. So acechapman.com. You can find him on Twitter. I didn't see a LinkedIn in our notes, but you
I am
probably have
on
LinkedIn. Yeah.
LinkedIn. Yeah, you're right. We didn't send that, but yeah, just search H Chapman.
Yeah, just jump right there on the website. You got a great YouTube channel with some content if people want to dive into that. That's kind of interesting. Is when I was trying to figure out what next to go to, I stumbled across your videos years ago, and it's one of the yours, Dan Locke, and a few other guys are the ones that like, man, I probably ought to take a look at this. I was just
Yeah.
telling on the last episode of this, I told the story of I hired a performance coach, and he told me one day, man, you should be playing a bigger game. Then every
Mm,
time I would close the house, even if it was a big win, and like there's this voice in the back of my head, but you should be playing a bigger game.
yep.
So I started looking around years ago, even before I closed the real estate investment group I had, um, looking around what would be my next game. And that's how I come across your content and some of these other guys. So it's exciting to have you on here. Thank you for being on here. Is there any parting notes you want to say before we shut this off?
No, no, I think that's really a great note to end on.
Yeah.
When my mentors would tell me like, no, like you need to get into the private equity game. It's like, okay, even for me, like maybe a little bit of that was the intimidation or whatever, going on this path to take a company public and getting that done. Like in each one of these cases, it's like, okay, what's the next bigger game to be played, but trying to be smart about it. I know for me and my personality, the $100 million fun game isn't a game that I want to play. I got to learn that at the $12 million level. Like, wait a minute, like, no, this isn't the life I'm trying to live. But figuring out what the game, just like you did, looking around, what's the game that I want to play, and then how do I play it on as big a level as possible.
Man, I do appreciate you. We're going to end the podcast right now. Hang out for a few seconds afterwards so we can wrap up a couple of things and answer any questions you might have about it. And that's the podcast. Thank you guys for listening in.
Thanks.
The Investors and Entrepreneurs Professional Mastermind. The Investors and Entrepreneurs Professional Mastermind combines the traditional peer-to-peer mastermind introduced first in Napoleon Hill's famous book, Think and Grow Rich, with accountability partnering, where your peers help you ensure that you set goals, take actions, and get results. If you want to scale, blow past roadblocks, and achieve success faster than you might think is possible, I suggest you take a visit over to tiepm.com. That's tiepm.com and check out the Investors and Entrepreneurs Professional Mastermind.